Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Grace Committed Chats, brought to you by Grace Committed Church here in Philadelphia. I am your host, Caleb Watt, here with my tall co-host, Pastor Doug. P. Doug, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about you, Caleb?
I'm doing fantastic because
Fantastic.
Yeah, because
Like a Philly fantastic.
Stop it. But it's like before we started, we were talking about your height. So then now I have good reason to use the adjective tall to describe you as my co-host. Instead of just using it because I didn't have another word.
I see.
Yeah, that's why I'm fantastic.
I thought, because, fantastic is the word people use right now for the Phillies.
Oh, the Philly fanatic?
Well, the Philly fanatic, but like you say fantastic because you can turn the F into a PH. But anyway, but,
That's true. But what are we talking about today, Peter?
well, we're talking about Philadelphia and why we love our city and just dreaming about what revival could look like in our city.
See, why do you love Philly, Peter?
Oh, it's a good question. It's hard to say enough because this is my home city. I love Philadelphia so much, but I think if I had to say like one thing I love most about Philly is the way that Philly, it's just there's this sense that like a pride in who we are of Philadelphia, despite all its flaws. It's like we own up to the flaws of our city and recognize this is like our own though. Right. We don't try to like cover over the flaws or anything like that. We own it all, but say like still like this is the city that we love. And if you don't like it, then fine. But we love our city. Like I love that kind of attitude. And I think one of the things that really just strikes me the most was when I thought this was hilarious when the Philadelphia Flyers, they were releasing their new mascot. Right. This was like a number of years ago. And it was like a big like lead up, like build up to it, and then they released it, and it was Gritty. For those of you who know the Flyers mascot, Gritty. And when it first was released, people were like, "Ew, this thing is like the most hideous thing ever!" Like, "Ew, like why? I can't believe this is the mascot." But those were the first reactions for Philadelphians. But then a few days later, the national media picked it up and was like, "Oh, look at this hideous mascot," like blah 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 blah. But as soon as like people outside of Philly started saying that, the tide changed completely on Philadelphians' view of Gritty. They're like, "Gritty's ours! Like we love Gritty! Like how could you bash Gritty?" It's like as soon as anyone else attacks it, it's like we will own it and take it and love it, right? Yeah, I feel like that just like encapsulates Philadelphia in so many ways. Like people love to poke fun at Philly, but we will love the things that people poke fun about.
That's true. We are very fanatical. PH.
Oh, PH. I see what you did there. Yeah.
I'm learning. I'm picking up the hints. Yeah.
How about you, Caleb? What do you love about Philly?
What do I love about Philly?
Oh, look at that.
Philadelphia
He
Eagles.
came prepared.
I came prepared. Yes,
that's the 5-0 undefeated Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, the 5-0 undefeated Philadelphia Eagles, and we're gonna go all the way back this year, I believe. But
run it back, as the kids say.
Yeah, run it back. It's our dynasty now, right?
Yeah.
Once we shut down the New England one. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like that question is like a little bit hard to answer for me because I've only spent. I guess you would say I've only spent 5 years living in Philly, whereas the rest of my life was spent in the suburbs of Philly, which is a drastically different experience, right? And even in Philly, most of my time is spent in U City, which is a very specific bubble of Philly, right? And so I guess first off, sports culture, fun. PHUN, fun.
Yeah, there's like kill this soon.
Yeah. I mean, like I remember the Super Bowl run and like stuff like that. It's like the first one in tour. Not the first one. I was but a child when McNabb was throwing up on the field, but the one in what was it?
04.
2017, 2018, like all the hype around that. It was like I guess you could say that of like any city, right? Where there's like a lot of anticipation, a lot of hype. But like for Philly, it does feel like a little bit special, right? Like as much as we were talking about like people dogging on Philly fans for like whatever reason, like even though they're about average, maybe a little bit more fanatical. It feels like there is something special to it, right? And I guess like even in the U City and the West Philly like sort of like environment is like, I guess U City specifically because it's a college area, right? There's like a great degree of diversity, but then you also get like, oh yeah, West Philly, right? Like the more like local stores, and then like the West Philly residents and like natives, and like being able to see like some of life there is like a little bit different, right? And homely in a sort of way, right? So yeah, that's what I think of when I think of Philly and Chinatown. I think of Chinatown too.
Yeah.
It's because we visited a whole bunch when I was a kid. Yeah. So.
Yeah. But I driving through like West Philly every day, what I love to see is how like even like there's a there's a unification of the whole city, right? I love of Philadelphia, like just driving down, it's like there's like corner stops like opening up, or like people selling like jerseys and things like that. Like little stores popping up and things like that, and there's like this love of the city that you can feel no matter where you are, whether you are in like West Philly or Center City or North Philly, South Philly, wherever, like it's like there's this like connective tissue of like love for the city, and I think that's like really really special. Yeah, there's like a Philly pride, if you know.
A Philly pride, yeah. That makes me feel like when you're a college student and you spend most of your time in like U City or like traveling to Center City, right? It's like how much more are you missing out on, right? In Philly, you're not seeing. You're just like not going to those places, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, and actually, and that leads me to what I kind of wanted to talk about was that like the reality is, as a church in University City, we can often be in like in a bubble, but I'm hoping that we can learn to like burst that bubble, because my heart is that God placed our church in Philadelphia for a reason, not just to be a bubble, right? Not to exist in a bubble, and just like keep people like just separated from the city, but to be a church that genuinely loves the city, right? God placed us here for a reason. God placed GCC in Philadelphia to love the city around us. Obviously, it started first like in University City on the campuses, but I believe God's heart is to use our church to love the whole city and to really seek its welfare. That's what it says in Jeremiah 29, right?
Yeah.
Seek the welfare of the city, the city of your exile. For in its welfare you'll find your own welfare, right? And that word welfare is actually shalom, which is a word we know, like it's a Hebrew word that we know, right? To mean like wholeness, peace, like just a sense of like completeness, right? In the city shalom, if we seek the shalom and the goodness, the wholeness of the city, the justice of the city, that in turn will be our like shalom, will be our peace, our justice, our goodness, our welfare, right? Seeking the welfare of the city is also seeking the welfare for ourselves as well, right? But God placed us in the city for a reason. Even if we're only here, even if like a student's here for only like a year, if you're only here for like a 1-year grad program or something, right? I think God called that person to be in the city, right? Not just to live in a bubble, and to maybe give back to the city in some sort of way. And I hope that as a church we have the attitude where we want to give back to the city that we're in, to seek to love it and to seek its welfare.
Right. I remember my discipler saying in college, he would always be like, where does Paul go first whenever he goes to a new region? Oh, he goes straight to the cities, right?
Yeah.
Why does he go to the cities? Because that's where the people are, right?
Human density.
Human density. Smart man, right? So I guess like one of my questions is like that hope maybe you can answer is like what areas do you feel like are unique to Philly in the sense of like, what do you see in Philly that's like, oh, you would describe as like, oh, Philadelphians have this particular need, or like the way that the culture plays out is like different from other cities? Because I grew up again in the suburbs, and maybe my experience is just limited to Philly, but you've lived in like Boston, right? And like visited many other cities, more cities than I have probably. And so it's like, is there something unique to like Philly and its like cultural identity that you're like, wow, the gospel could really like impact it here in this sort of way?
Yeah. Well, honestly, I think something special about Philly is like sort of this unity, right? I think there is a real like unity around like, obviously around sports, because and they got, many cities have that as well. But I feel like there's something a little different in Philly. But I feel like there's a sense like if you're in Philly, like it's a Philly thing, right? There's this sense of like you are from, like you're in Philly, and that's like, that means something. But obviously that's still only surface level or superficial, if that's like the final basis of it. But I don't know, like part of me like just could dream of a day that like faith in Jesus is what really unifies our city together. Like this belief in our God, like our Savior, who comes to make all things new, right? Part of the Philly pride is also the pride is like a weird, inferiority complex about the things that are broken in Philly, right? I think Philly is definitely a city with inferiority complex that we own up to, or that we like cherish almost, right? It's kind of a result of living in a city that is sort of in the shadow of like New York, right? That we know like Philly can never be as like big or as influential as New York, but rather than to try to be like New York, be like New York, we just own up to the fact that like we're not, right? We're like, it's almost like this weird inferiority complex that we own up to. And I think that's like that kind of like unifies the city in that sort of way. But if there is a unification around Jesus, then that he's the one who makes all things new. Man, I feel like that could really just, that could be so special if there was like a revival like that in the city. Especially if it involved like churches rising up to say, hey, we love our city. We love the city. We want to seek its welfare, and we want to see Jesus be like the king on the throne. You know, and the reality is also a lot of people in Philly are tired of like government, right? There's a lot of people always angry at city council, angry at the mayor, right? And you know, so sometimes there's corruption, things in court, right? Over that, people have seen, you know, like they've gone through a lot of just broken different like government systems within Philly, but to believe in a king who is good and like does all things well, man, that could really just like, I feel like, that could really take hold and change the city.
What would that look like? I guess that's the $1,000,000 question that we're driving towards, right? But what would it look like specifically for our church, right?
Yeah.
As you said, based in U City, right? A lot of college students still in the bubble, right? What would it look like to I guess one of the things that comes to mind, right, is like is in Matthew 28, the end of Matthew, where it's like Judea, Samaria, ends of the earth, and then like Acts 1, right? It seems like there's like the concentric circle, like sort of like bubble model that's like working out. So it's like I think you could almost define like maybe GCC's Judea, right, our very localized spot is like U City, right, where the campuses are, and that's where I'd say like where most of our outreach attempts and focus are, right? But what would it look like to expand from Judea into Samaria, right, for us, and I guess the ends of the earth?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, in my mind, like, you know, if we're in University City, like we're University is part of West Philly, and you know, I wish we could do more for the sake of like West Philly. I wish we could be a church that that has families coming from like West Philly as well to our church. I'd love to see us be able to be a church for not just the campuses and the immediate areas, but just for even like the area of West Philly. Like, you know, I'd love to see us be involved in just what's going on in West Philly. I'd love to see us be able to even bless schools in West Philly and things like that, right? Like the church is meant to be this like salt and light, to really love, you know, to love as Jesus did, to embody the kingdom. And so we should embody the kingdom, right? In this place, in this neighborhood that God has placed us. So I'd say that would be like the Samaria is like all of West Philly. Right? We started, God planted us on the campuses, but I think, you know, my heart and my hope is that we'd see us be able to like reach just West Philly, and maybe even also a little bit into like Center City, because we're sort of on the Schuylkill, just like a stone's throw away into certain neighborhoods like Rittenhouse or Fittler Square, Grad Hospital areas. You know, I'd love to see us, you know, being able to reach more and more people in those areas as well. Yeah. And also just to reflect the demographic a little more of these areas, right? Not just like ethnically, culturally, but even just like socioeconomically as well. Because right now, like a lot of like students or like young adults, it's a certain socioeconomic. But I'd love to see us be a church that reflects more of a wide range of socioeconomic, so that we can like really embody like what it means to be a local church. Yeah.
How do we get there?
How do we get there? We just got to keep like seeking the Lord and just walk with Him. I mean, I think we just got to seek faithfulness and pray, and pray to say like, Lord, like how can we love this city, and see how we can get more involved? Because I think just we haven't always been that involved, you know, in the city. But how can we do that more? And we have a passion conference coming up, Passion for the City, and we're hoping to see like revival spill out into the city and to see how God is working to gain a heart for the city, and perhaps that will lead to certain connections, you know, divine connections with different people to help us be able to like start to build connections in the city and see how then we can really love the city a little bit more.
I like that, P-Dog.
Yeah.
I like that. It does feel like, in some sense, right? Like, and maybe it's because it's like the sense of like we're culture is like as a whole in the West, right? But it's like it does feel like church is a little bit insular,
Yeah.
right? Like church is the bubble.
Yeah.
And again, maybe it's like in the West, it's like religion versus non-religion is us versus them, sort of mindset. But it's like hearing about other people talk about churches, right? Knowing a lot of my friends, not, and I'm not trying to throw them under the bus, but it's like it seems like there's like churches all around Philly, GCC being one of them, and they're all just like little bubbles of space that exist somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of like some churches for sure better at like the community outreach and like stuff like that, and more plugged into their communities. But like for by and large, it sounds like bubble, and even within the church, there's not a lot of connections between the bubbles, right? So a greater, more unified Philly under the gospel, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
sign me up, P-Dog.
I know that's the hope, right? That's the hope that we would see Philadelphia would see Jesus as the true King and the only one who can bring like goodness and righteousness, justice to a city that's really in need, right? There is a lot of broken things in the city, right? We don't, like I said, Philly doesn't try to hide the things, right? We own up to it, but I would love to see Jesus come and see His people rise up. I think what we need to see is a revival that starts in the churches in Philly and that sort of spreads from there. I mentioned even in a previous episode that we're talking about what revival would look like. And I said, I think revival in our country, in our day, would look like more local. It would start in a more like locally focused space, right? Away from like the mega church destination church model to being a more like local church model where we like love the community, where we're like missional in the community that God has placed us. I believe that's what revival would look like in our new generation. And if we want to pray for revival in Philly, I think we have to pray for more churches to have this missional, local-minded model to really love the city that God has placed us in and to join together to see His welfare, like see God's welfare come upon the city, see His shalom come upon the city. So I think, we have to see more churches that have that focus to love the city and willing even to work together for the sake of like bringing God's justice and goodness to the city.
So we have Passion Conference coming up, right? But what do you want the fruit of Passion Conference to be in our church, right? Like what sort of like new initiatives, or like maybe they don't necessarily even have to be like church like driven initiatives, right? Like from staff, but like how do you like you keep saying like new heart for the city, but what does that practically look like? Or what are you envisioning perhaps in some sense?
There's what I envision, or what like, it might be different from what necessarily will happen. Right?
Sure.
Because I'm like, I can dream a little bit, but ultimately my posture right now is to say like, God, do what you want to do, and to have a ears to listen. Because my hope is that through passion, we would gain a heart to love the city, like as a church. But then that would also lead to maybe like the Lord opening up doors, right? Many of our service projects that we're doing are with like different groups. Maybe something really clicks well, and we're like, oh, maybe there's like a partnership we can form, right? Or maybe there's like I said, like divine connections of some sort. But this is a way just for us to like just throw out the net and to see like what is going to happen, and then like how will God lead us through that, right? What are the things that maybe will happen, what are the connections that will make? So I don't know exactly what, but my hope is that there will be some sort of like going to be connections, because I wouldn't want passion to be like, oh, good job us, pat on the back, we love their city, let's move on with our lives. Like if that happened, then like what was the point, right? That we just fueled our own self-righteousness. But if we can like look back and say, wow, that was the start of something, like of our church really loving the city, that's what I'm hoping for. And so I'm hoping that it will like set our hearts on fire to love the city, and then from it there'll be like fruit where we can like, or like connections that we formed where we can continue to like build those connections,
Yeah. Well, this actually reminds me a lot of podcast episodes that I did for Christian Union back in the day, before like COVID happened and stuff like that. Like a lot of times I would ask like the student leaders like, what do you want to see Christian Union, right, at the time. And so I was a sophomore and these were like seniors and like whatever, seniors and juniors, and I'd be like, oh, where do you want to see Christian Union in 5 years? And a lot of them would say something, I wouldn't say exactly the same, but something very similar, where it's like, oh, Christian Union students or Penn students in general, right? Christians at Penn even, right? Serving the city, right? That we are known as the people who, like, people when they need help that they can call upon, that we're there, right? And present. And so it's like, I guess like thinking about this, right? With relation to GCC even, it's like there's people who want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's, I think, the
Yeah.
very encouraging thing, where there are people who are like this, like kingdom minded, right? Students, and students, again, being the main demographic that I'm familiar with, students who are itching to do that and looking for the opportunities to do that. And so I think it's like, yeah, involving the church, like even more, like in a more like a, what you would call it, like a centralized sort of way, is certainly like a great way to be like, oh, this is the gateway, and now you can go and be the kingdom. And so, yeah, I like that thought, P-Doug.
Yeah.
I like a lot of your thoughts.
Oh, thank you. Gil.
Dilly.
Yeah, Philly.
Philly. Well, do you have any other thoughts, P-Doug?
My encouragement is that we can just pray. Let's have that, like I said, that posture of just waiting on the Lord and see how He leads us. And my prayer is that that this would be the seeds of revival that God will spread to the city. But it can't be just us, right? It's not just our church. Like I mentioned, like you think many churches rising up, and let's pray that not only God would set our church on fire for the city, but other churches as well, and that from that there'd be a movement and even partnerships that can form from it.
I agree. Well, thank you, P-Doug, for the thoughts and for being a Philly fanatic.
Philly fanatic. And go Fightins tonight. Game 4. This is it. If the Phillies win, they move on to the NLCS.
Shoot. So by the time this episode comes out,
by the time this comes out, we'll have known the result.
Yeah, we'll have known the result, and you can ask P-Doug how he feels about that in person. But thank you so much for joining us today for another episode of Grace Covenant Chats, brought to you by Grace Covenant Church here in Philadelphia. If you're new here, you can go check out our website at philly.gracecovenant.net, and join us on Sundays for our service series, still going through revival. And we will see you next time.